Hi there, welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer your questions about primarily knitting, but sometimes we dip into some other topics along the making realm. And today I am wearing my big cozy cardi because it just felt so right to get cozy. We had a little warm up here, and thankfully then we had a little cool down, and I am not minding the cool down. So let's jump in. Oh, and this uses Moon Dance. Yeah, that's right. I'm just trying to remember the name of the yarn for sure, but it is from Brooklyn General Store, or is it Sky Dance? It's Sky Dance. I knew it had to do with up there and dancing. But this is from Brooklyn General Store. It is their special yarn they get milled for them. And then this incredibly delightful collar is Odang Surrey Alpaca from the Farmer's Daughter Fibers. All right, let's jump in. So for question number 1, I would love the Tessellated vest, and I would love to knit it next. You are using superwash yarn for yours. It is, let's try this one again. I would love the Tessellated vest and to knit it next. You are using superwash yarn for yours. Is it important to the pattern to use superwash yarn? I am in Scotland and already have to supplement the sport weight for another weight yarn, as sport is not that common here, but superwash in a garment terrifies me and I'd rather use non-superwash yarn. I was just wondering if there's any technical necessity of using superwash. Nope. You can go ahead and use non-superwash, would be absolutely fine. Actually, the superwash yarns I used in that pattern, for the vest, it was Moondrake Moonspun and Spinsicle yarns dyed in the wool. And those yarns do not feel like your typical superwash. They are quite a high twist, and they're not overly soft and drapey the way we might think about some, like a MCN, like a merino cashmere nylon, or some of those other superwash yarns that have like all the drape and the softness. These yarns have a little more oomph to them, which I actually really appreciate when it comes to knitting sweaters, because I feel like they don't grow overly much. They don't necessarily act in the same way that some superwash yarns do, where I feel like they're a little more stable and have a little bit more memory and bounce back. So I think swapping in a non-superwash yarn will work beautifully, because those yarns are, as far as a superwash goes, act more like a non-superwash. So absolutely, you do you. Question number 2. I'm currently knitting my second handspun Attune shawl. Yay! And I love the fact that you are allowed to use 2 different yarn weights in a single item. It's a fun way to use my skeins of not always consistent handspun yarn. Tell me about it. Do you think it's something I could also do in colorwork? Or do you know other patterns that would use this feature? So I do think you could do it in colorwork. You would want the weights to be close. So I wouldn't want them to be drastically different, but you know, it's so interesting because in all of these conversations, it does come down to nuance. Like some yarns, even though they're listed as, let's say, a fingering or a sport weight yarn, they poof so much, they bloom so much after you wash and block them, that you can kind of push the lines of how you want to use them. You can use them as a bit heavier than what they're defined as. Even things like baby Surrey Alpaca, that is one of those ones where, like, with this pattern, we got a bunch of emails being like, wait, we don't have to change needle size for the collar? And I'm like, no, even though this is labeled as a lace weight yarn, that alpaca, I mean, this is still pretty opaque for being this like sheer lace weight fluffy, so delightful yarn, because the fuzz in it just like puffs it right up. I mean, it's so fun, so magical. So, and with our handspun can really bounce once we wash it. So I do think you can play around with it in color work, especially because a lot of times color work is like little bits, you know, it's not usually a drastic part of something. Even in all over color work, depending on what those motifs are. Like if they're little Piri motifs, kind of like in my stone crop or stone crop cardi, you can still get away with kind of fudging the weight to an extent. So I wouldn't necessarily say use fingering weight hand spun in your worsted weight sweater for the color work, because that might look real open and gapey. And but if you're going a little bit on the heavier side, it could also add some really interesting texture to your color work, which is kind of fun to think about. But I will also say my other place that I do love to play with that is in brioche. So I think most brioche projects you can really play around, hence why you can do it in the Attune shawl, is because it just adds to the dimension of the brioche. Brioche is such a dimensional fabric, you know, it's really more 3D. It's such a squishy ribbing. And so I think that by playing around with yarn weights, it just exaggerates that in a really cool way. So brioche is definitely a place I would look to play around with that. And oh, one other thing I wanted to point out to maybe consider is the best time to play around with that is in something like a shawl, because it doesn't have to fit a specific part of your body. You just wrap it around yourself, drape it over your shoulders, whereas a hat or a sweater might need to fit a very specific part of your body well, and playing around with those yarn weights is going to affect your gauge to a degree that it maybe would make it not feel great where you're trying to wear it. Okay. Question number 3. I am curious about how to fix the bottom of a button band without frogging the entire thing. I am knitting a sweater for my nephew, and the bottom where the ribbing, waist, and button band intersect, the button band is not level with the bottom of the cardigan, and I feel there has to be a way to get the button band edge and waist ribbing even. Could I use crochet, either slip stitch or single crochet, or sew it? Or is there a way to knit it? I hope this is something you can help me with. So I would try, so first let's tackle your immediate situation, which is, can you fix this without redoing it? My number one question is, have you blocked it yet? Because blocking might open up that ribbing and be a good enough fix where you feel okay with that. If you have, and you're like, it's still doing that, and I know exactly what you're talking about, it's that little loop, in which case I love the idea of the crochet, because I think you could put in some mock. I mean, when you think about like a crochet single little chain, if you crocheted along the bottom there, it looks kind of like little sideways knit stitches, and I think that that could really, especially if you think about when that sweater is on your nephew, nobody's gonna get real close to that button band. I think it could really give the appearance of a more even bottom. One other thing I would think about is your nephew going to wear open or buttoned, and how does it look? Have you tried buttoning it up, and how does it look there? So I like to ask these questions because sometimes as the maker, we are so zoomed in with our magnifying glass, like really looking at the details of our work, that does it have to be fixed? But if you're not happy with it, then yeah, let's make it the best it can be. So I like the ideas you have, and I would definitely try out, especially that crochet idea I love. But I've often thought about this as well. So I went to the professional Patty Lyons, who I happened to see it pop up in my, must have been in my Instagram feed from Modern Daily Knitting. And Patty did a whole blog post on knitting perfect button bands for them. And I thought it was fabulous because she absolutely talks about this problem. And two of the things that she pointed out that I was like, oh, that just makes so much sense, is one, that when we go to pick up that very first stitch, we're not picking up as low as we should. If you, like, she shows a picture of pushing her knitting needle in and kind of taking down the corner of where you're about to start picking up stitches for your button band. And there's like one spot just below where we generally kind of think to start picking up stitches, where if you start there, it really helps square it off. And also paying attention to, are you picking up enough stitches? You know, for a lot of patterns, the button bands, you have a little wiggle room on how many stitches you're picking up, as long as you work within keeping your ribbing, you know, is it 2x2, whatever it is. And then just button placement, keeping that in the back of your head. But anyways, I just thought this was a fabulous blog post. So I'm going to link it below because I was like, oh, this is exactly what you're asking. And I think a lot of people have this problem. I know I have for sure. So I'm excited to try out these techniques. So I put that below, and I think a lot of us will find it helpful. So thank you, Patty. All right, question number 4. I was wondering about gauge in a pattern that is done top down and starts with working flat, the back yoke, then picking up stitches for the front. And it's worked like this until you join under the armholes, and then the whole project is worked in the round. How do you do the swatching? Flat or in the round? Which counts? I did some projects from patterns like this, and I have ideas to make something for myself without a pattern, and I was wondering about this. So, generally speaking, a lot of patterns actually have a point where you're going to work part of it flat. A lot of, like all of my drop shoulder patterns will have the yoke because unless you're steeking, you've got armholes and neck holes and things like that. So there are times when people are going to have you work flat before you join in the round. So the answer is you need to have gauge both ways. So technically what I generally do, and I think what is most common, is we recommend doing your gauge swatch in the way of which most of the garment is knit. So if it's mostly knit in the round, that's probably what's going to be recommended in the pattern. It's going to say get gauge in the round. But you have to maintain your gauge. And that is something that is then assumed that you know you need to maintain it for your sleeves. You need to maintain it if part of it's knit flat. You need to maintain your gauge. So if you know that your gauge changes depending on if you're knitting flat or in the round, then I would recommend doing a gauge swatch both styles, flat and in the round. And that's the way to truly know. Another way you can do it is not going to be as true of a gauge because it's going to be pre-blocked, but you can check it against itself. So one thing you could do is as you're knitting, so for the instance, this is started flat. So maybe since you're going to start flat, you might want to gauge swatch flat because that's right out the gate what you're starting with. And then what I would do is when you join to work in the round, once you've worked a bit, I would check your gauge on the part in the round against your gauge that you worked flat and just make sure you're staying consistent and do it again for your sleeves because that's really where I see such a big change is a lot of people when they go from large circumference to small circumference really tighten up their knitting. And that's when sleeves will end up too small and not fitting properly. And so making sure that if you can't maintain gauge on your current needle size, change needle sizes so that you can maintain the correct gauge. And that's what you would want to do too. If your knitting gauge really does change a lot between knitting flat back and forth in rows and knitting in the round, then I would recommend just switching up that needle so that you can stay consistent. That's the most important thing, is staying consistent. So checking as you go is totally fine because you're checking against itself. You're making sure that you're remaining consistent within the pattern. So for doing that, it doesn't have to be post-blocking. But yeah, I think maybe what I would go with, if I was working on a pattern like this, I would start again. Here's my advice. I would go, if you're going to start in the round, swatch in the round. If you're going to start flat, swatch flat. It never hurts to do more than one swatch. So if you've got the yarn, the time, and the love of knitting, maybe do 2 swatches. If you're not going to do 2 swatches, make sure that once you switch to the other style, whether it's going to flat or to the round, just make sure you stay consistent with what you've already done. Boom. That's my advice. All right. Let's get to the last question already. I feel like I'm just blowing through these. All right. My question is about sleeve decreases. In patterns, when you establish your sleeve, there is typically verbiage like continue decreasing every 4th row or something similar. Does that mean I do a decrease row, knit 3 rows, and then do another decrease row on the 4th row? Or do I do the decrease row, knit 4 rows, then do the next decrease row? I'm always a bit lost on what to do, on when to do the decrease row. And I totally get that, especially because not everyone writes it the same. And so it can mean either of those things depending on how it's written. So let's kind of dig into the example you gave. So it said, continue decreasing every 4th row. So to me, that says that you decrease on the 4th row. So you would work 3 rows plain, decrease on the 4th. Work 3 rows plain, decrease on the 4th. So that's how I break that down. I was gonna try and come up with a quick, snappy, oh, but in this case, you would do this, but I have a feeling I would just sit here going like this and then say something confusing. So we just aren't even gonna do that. We're not even gonna worry about it. All right, but yes, if it says continue decreasing every 4th row, whatever it may be, then that is saying on the 4th row because it's saying every 4th row. That's how it reads to me, at least. All right. I really blew through this one this time. And it has just been such a busy fall. Oh, you know what I can show you? I actually have some yarn I can show you. So, La Bien May has come out with spinning fiber. And I was so lucky and got to do a little preview spin as they were developing it. And it is so much fun. So this one, if I remember correctly, because of course I don't have, oh, you know what? Did I put it in my little spinning journal? Don't know if I did, but we will check. All right, let's do a little of this. And of course not. Things have been all crazy here. Oof, sorry. Now I'm like, oh wow, I have a lot of spinning journal to update. But so, oh my goodness, I wish you could touch this. Let's do one of these. So this is 100% cashmere, which I had not spun before. And I will say it was tricky. It drafts so fast. It's so soft. And so it was a little bit of a learning curve for me, but I'm still very happy with how my skein turned out. So they had sent me 3 little bumps of it, and I just spun them each as a single and then plied them together. So this is a 3-ply using 3 different colors of a little mini peachy pink gradient. And what amazed me was how much this fluffed up. I mean, at first it was not this like fluffy and round. I was just amazed by it. I would love to knit it up now because it is so round and plumpy. I mean, looking at it, I feel like this is like an Aran weight. This is almost like bulky. It's really chonky. So much fun, so soft. So I'm also curious as to how that will knit up, how the drape will be. And then this is their other one, which as of right now, I'm not 100% positive on the names. I am guessing they're gonna call this confetti because it is just like their confetti yarn they sell for all of you non-spinners. You can buy beautiful yarn that looks like this, but for us spinners who are like, we wanna make it ourselves. Come on, there she is. Sorry, that was a lot of unfocused time. It really is trying to search for my face. But anyways, this was so delightful to spin and it was so much fun. I did a 3-ply and I don't have my notes right here, so I don't know anything else. But there is some show and tell, at least to show you, because it's been a little while since I got to do any show and tell. I am finishing up some projects right now. Lots of fun new patterns on the way. I just need to get them done and dusted and out to you all. So they are coming. I have a fun new one coming right at the end of this month that I cannot wait to show you. But before that, we have Rhinebeck next week. So my next video will have to be pre-recorded so that it can go out the Friday of Rhinebeck because I'll be there. Maybe I'll try and talk some of my knitter friends into joining me for a video, because that would be fun. We haven't done that in a long time. All right, I am going to end this here. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. If you are living in the beautiful autumnal season as I am, I hope you are enjoying it. It's so beautiful. And I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you get cozy and make something. I'm thinking spinning on the front porch with maybe a blanket on the lap and a hot drink in my hand. Sounds delightful. So have a great one. And thanks as always for joining me. I really hope to see you back here next week. And that's all I got. Bye.